Lake Erie is the second smallest Great Lake by surface area and the smallest by volume. Lake Erie's average depth is only 62 feet, and its deepest point is only 210. But Lake Erie also has the highest density of shipwrecks per square mile than the other four lakes. During a storm, the shallow waters of the lake produce massive waves out of nowhere and hit with punishing force. It's estimated that there are between 5,000 and 2,000 shipwrecks at the bottom of Lake Erie, and most of them remain undiscovered. Here are 5 Eerie shipwrecks on Lake Erie. On June 16, 1850, the relatively new paddle steamer G.P. Griffith departed Buffalo, New York with over 300 passengers on board bound for Toledo, Ohio. However, unbeknownst to the passengers of the steamer, in just a few hours, they would be in a fight for their lives. Constructed in 1848 in Maumee, Ohio, the G.P. Griffith was a wooden-hulled side-wheel paddle steamer designed to carry passengers and cargo throughout the Great Lakes. Named after a local businessman, the Griffith came in at 587 gross tons and measured 193 feet or 59 meters in length. She entered service in 1848, and her short career was mostly uneventful. But on October 17, 1849, the Griffith collided with the Canadian schooner California near Cleveland. While the Griffith suffered no serious damage from the collision, the California had been heavily damaged and had drifted ashore. But the Griffith was repaired and returned to service. But just a few months later, her career would come to a catastrophic end. On June 16, 1850, the Griffith departed Buffalo, New York, bound for Toledo, Ohio, with over 300 passengers on board. On the way, she would stop in Erie, Pennsylvania, Fairport, Ohio, and Cleveland before making her way to Toledo. That night was calm, and most of the passengers decided to sleep on the hurricane deck rather than in their cabins. At around 3 a.m. on the morning of June 17th, the ship's wheelsman was on duty when he noticed sparks coming from the ship's funnel. He alerted the first mate, and some of the crew tried to extinguish the fire with buckets of water, but the flames wouldn't go out. Soon the fire alarm was sounded, and many passengers navigated through the smoke-filled hallways to reach the boat deck. The ship's captain had calculated that they were only a few miles from shore, and he hoped that the ship could be beached. Acting quickly, he ordered the ship to sail full steam ahead to beach her, in order to allow the passengers a safe exit from the burning ship. However, the movement of the ship only fanned the flames, and caused the fire to spread toward the stern. On top of that, her forward motion made it impossible for the smoldered lifeboats to be launched. Soon the ship was completely engulfed in flames, meaning anybody still on the ship had nowhere to run. The crew and the passengers used whatever they could to put out the flames, but it was no use. Soon there was an aggressive lurch, and the steamer came to a stop. The passengers assumed that they made it to the beach, but they found out that they had actually run aground on a sandbar about half a mile offshore. By this point, the crew and passengers' only hope of survival was to jump from the ship, swim for the shore, and hope for the best. The Griffith was unable to free itself from the sandbar, and as the passengers jumped from the deck, some of them got sucked into the paddle wheel, which was still turning, and were crushed immediately. Local residents could see the flames from the ship in the distance, which lit up the night sky. Soon the bodies of the victims washed ashore, and the Griffith was nothing more than a smoldered hulk of its former self. And eventually, she drifted off the sandbar and slipped beneath the surface. In the end, out of the 326 passengers and crew on board that night, 286 of them lost their lives. To this day, it remains the deadliest shipwreck on Lake Erie. On June 28, 1899, the nearly 12-year-old steam barge Margaret Olwill departed Kelly's Island on Lake Erie with a load of limestone bound for Cleveland, a voyage she had done many times throughout her career. Unbeknownst to the crew, however, a rare early summer storm would soon pass over the lake, and the Olwill would be claimed by Lake Erie. Designed by James P. Smith, the Margaret Olwill is a wooden-hulled steam barge constructed in 1887 in Cleveland. She came in at 544 gross tons and measured 176 feet in length. She was named after the first wife of the founder that owned the ship. The ship was designed to carry limestone from the quarry at Kelly's Island on Lake Erie to Cleveland, and for nearly 12 years, the ship did just that. On the evening of June 28, 1899, the Olwill, under the command of Captain John Brown, departed Kelly's Island bound for her usual destination in Cleveland with a load of 900 tons of limestone and a crew of 13. The weather was calm during the early stages of the voyage, but as she made her way to Cleveland, 50-mile-per-hour winds swept over Lake Erie, building massive waves that crashed into the freighter with punishing force. As the small freighter was battered by the winds and waves, her hull began to crack along her seams, allowing water to pour deep into her holes, causing the ship to develop a severe list. By 2 a.m., Captain Brown realized that his ship couldn't handle much more, and he decided to turn around to seek shelter along the shore. However, when the ship was making the turn, she lost her steering. Soon the ship was broadsided by a massive wave, and Captain Brown ordered everybody into the lifeboat, but it was too late. The ship was broadsided by another massive wave, and she capsized. Afterward, her cabin house ripped free from the ship and drifted away before the rest of her hull disappeared beneath the surface of Lake Erie. Luckily, 4 of the Olwill's crew members were able to grab onto the floating wreckage of her cabin house, but they struggled to keep themselves out of the water. They spent 4 hours on the damaged cabin house. Then at 5:15 a.m., Captain Willoughby of the steamer State of Ohio came across a large debris field where they found the 4 men on the cabin house. The crew of the State of Ohio tossed lifelines to rescue the men, and they were soon brought aboard. In the end, 9 people lost their lives in the disaster. A handful of the bodies of the Olwill's crew were found over the coming days and weeks. Many theories emerged on what caused the Margaret Olwill to sink when she did. Some claimed that the ship was overloaded, making it easier for the ship to take on water as waves broke over her deck. Others claimed that the ship was simply overwhelmed by the storm, which was unusually powerful for early summer. The wreck of the Margaret Olwill was discovered in 2017, around 30 miles west of Cleveland, in roughly 50 feet of water at the bottom of Lake Erie. On the night of December 8, 1909, the iron-hulled steamer Clarion was fighting through a rough, late-season gale in northern Lake Erie while carrying a cargo of grain. Massive waves repeatedly crashed over her deck, and visibility was poor due to the driving snow and a dense fog bank. Although her crew didn't know it, their ship would not be consumed by the storm, but instead a devastating inferno. Labeled Hull Number 45, the Clarion was constructed in 1881 by the Detroit Dry Dock Company in Wyandotte, Michigan for the Erie and Western Transportation Company based in Erie, Pennsylvania. She would be one of the first ships on the lakes to have an iron hull rather than a wooden hull. The ship was launched on July 27, 1881, and entered service a few weeks later. She came in at 1,712 tons and measured 241 feet or 73 meters in length. The ship was designed to carry general cargo throughout the Great Lakes, and for the next 28 years, she reliably did just that. On December 7, 1909, the Clarion, under the command of Captain Thomas J. Bell, departed Chicago with a load of grain, flour, and mixed cargo bound for Buffalo, New York. The Clarion managed just fine as she made her way through Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, but when she passed through the Detroit River and entered Lake Erie, a strong gale swept over the lake. By nightfall on December 8th, the Clarion was facing the full force of the storm. Soon the ship had entered the stretch of water between Pelee Island and Point Pelee, Ontario, known as the Pelee Passage. Pelee Passage is one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Lake Erie because of its shallow waters and many navigational hazards. At around 7 p.m., the ship was around 2 miles west of Southeast Shoal, when engineer Alfred Welch and first mate Jim Thompson smelled a distant odor of wood smoke. They knew that the ship's boilers weren't the source of the scent, so first mate Thompson went below deck with a fire extinguisher to investigate. Only a few moments later, the ship's power failed, plunging the steamer into darkness. And soon the vessel's hallways were filled with thick smoke as the Clarion quickly caught on fire. Only a few minutes earlier, the ship was fighting her way through the storm, and now she was engulfed in flames. The gale-force winds only fed the flames, causing the fire to move further aft, and her wooden decks were now providing fuel to the fire. Captain Bell hoped that he might be able to beach his ship on the nearby shoals, but the fire was spreading too quickly to do anything. Luckily, they were less than a mile from the Point Pelee life-saving station, so the captain and 12 crew members boarded her metal lifeboat and left the ship. They were never seen again. 7 crew members were still on the ship when the captain and 12 crew members left the ship. They tried sending distress signals, hoping that the Point Pelee lighthouse keeper would hear them, but due to the fog and heavy snowfall, it was impossible for their signals to be seen. The ship's engineer, Alfred Welch, then climbed the ladder on the side of the Clarion's funnel and started manually sounding the ship's whistle, hoping that their distress signal would be heard. 7 crew members still on the ship lowered the Clarion's wooden yawl so they could evacuate. However, before they could even board the boat, the monstrous waves surrounding the ship quickly flooded the boat. Crew member Joe McCauley tried to bail the boat before it capsized in the raging seas, and McCauley was dragged beneath the waves. He never resurfaced. On top of that, the boat was lost too. Now, only 6 men were left on the ship. They waited several hours for rescue, as the fire ate away at the vessel. Luckily, the nearby steamer H.B. Bope, which was ironically the first freighter on the lakes to use wireless equipment, spotted the flames through the blizzard. Her crew immediately notified other ships in the area, and soon the freighter Hosea G. Monroe received the call from the Bope and raced to the area. Unfortunately, the Monroe ran aground on Southeast Shoal. There was nothing they could do as the Clarion drifted away and disappeared into the fog. Finally, 4 hours later, Captain Anderson of the freighter Leonard C. Hanna spotted the ship and sailed over to offer assistance. After considerable effort by Captain Anderson, the Hanna was able to rescue the 6 men on board. The exhausted men were soon taken to Cleveland, where they were treated for their injuries from the sinking. Once they recovered, the 6 survivors went to Buffalo to speak with the ship's owners. The 6 survivors said that the captain of the H.B. Bope could have saved everyone on the ship had they stopped, rather than simply reporting the ship sinking. But the captain of the boat quickly denied these claims by stating it would have been impossible for him to mount a rescue in the brutal conditions. Unfortunately, the 13 men who boarded the ship's metal lifeboat didn't survive the storm. All but 2 of the bodies of the ship's crew were found. Today, the wreck of the Clarion lies just east of Southeast Shoal, around 30 miles north of Lorain, Ohio, at the bottom of Lake Erie. However, the Clarion was not the only ship claimed by that storm. Same day the Clarion caught on fire and sank. The car ferry Marquette Bessemer No. 2 vanished on Lake Erie after departing Conneaut, Ohio. To this day, her wreck remains undiscovered. Labeled hull number 428, the Marquette Bessemer No. 2 was constructed in 1905 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio for the Marquette Bessemer Dock and Navigation Company, and was launched on September 12, 1905. She came in at 2,514 gross tons and measured 338 feet or 103 meters in length. She was powered by 2 quadruple expansion steam engines, which drove twin screws for a top speed of around 10 knots. The ferry was designed to transport railroad cars and occasionally passengers between Conneaut, Ohio, and Port Stanley, Ontario, and for the next 4 years, the ferry reliably did just that. But in November of 1909, the No. 2 was caught in a rough November gale. You see, railroad cars would be loaded on the ferry through the stern, but the ship did not have a gate to prevent water from entering her stern. During the voyage, as the ship was battered by the heavy seas, a huge amount of water was able to enter the opening in her stern. She only barely survived the ordeal. Following the voyage, the ship's captain, Robert McLeod, complained to the ship's owners about the open stern. Luckily, they agreed to install a gate on the ship at the end of the season, but the ferry would continue sailing in the meantime, and she continued to do so for the next few weeks. On December 7, 1909, the Marquette Bessemer No. 2 was loaded with 30 rail cars in Conneaut, Ohio, bound for her usual destination in Port Stanley, Ontario. The ship was scheduled to leave port at 8 a.m., but before she could cast off, a nearby freighter that was being tied up for the winter snapped free in the building winds and blocked the channel. 2 hours later, the freighter was secured and the No. 2 could depart. But as soon as she started her engines, a man ran up the dock and shouted for the ship to stop. Some of the crew echoed his calls, and Captain McLeod turned his ship back toward the dock, and the man was able to jump aboard. He was the ship's single passenger. Then, at around 10:45 a.m., the ferry slipped out of Conneaut Harbor and into Lake Erie. Around the same time the ship departed, winds were exceeding 50 miles per hour, and massive swells broke over the bow of the ferry. The last confirmed sighting of the Marquette Bessemer No. 2 came when she passed the West Breakwater, where crew were working to install a new fog signal. Captain McLeod shouted to them to get it fixed because he might need it on their way back. The crew rang the fog bell, and soon the No. 2 sailed for the open lake. By late afternoon, a full gale had set in over Lake Erie, and continued to intensify over the next few hours. Strangely, throughout that night, people on both sides of Lake Erie claimed to have seen and heard the No. 2 battling her way through the storm, but she never arrived in port. Over the next few weeks and months, debris and bodies from the ferry were discovered all over Lake Erie. It's believed that the open stern allowed water to pour into the ship and send her to the bottom, but without any survivors, it's impossible to know for sure. Almost immediately after the vessel went missing, the Marquette Bessemer Dock and Navigation Company ordered a replacement ship that would be built using almost the exact same plans. The new Marquette Bessemer No. 2 was launched on September 3, 1910, and entered service on October 6, and she was equipped with a stern gate. The company received harsh criticism for using the same name for the ship, implying that they were hoping to erase the disaster from memory. The new ship sailed for nearly 90 years until she was scrapped in 1997. As of the making of this video, the wreck of the original Marquette Bessemer No. 2 remains undiscovered. In late October of 1916, the remnants of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico merged with 2 other storm systems over the western end of Lake Erie. Often referred to as the Black Friday Storm, it was one of the deadliest storms to ever hit Lake Erie. 4 ships met their end in the storm, claiming the lives of 49 sailors. Perhaps the most notable shipwreck during the Black Friday storm was the whaleback freighter James B. Colgate. Labeled hull number 121, the Colgate was constructed in 1892 by the American Steel Barge Company in West Superior, Wisconsin. She was built at a time when whaleback freighters were becoming fairly common on the lakes. The vessel was launched on September 21, 1892, and entered service on October 17th. She came in at 1,713 gross tons and measured 308 feet or 94 meters in length. In 1901, the Colgate was sold to the Pittsburgh Steamship Company, based in Cleveland, which operated the vessel until 1915 when she was sold to the Standard Transit Company, based in Duluth, Minnesota. And her nearly 24-year-long career was mostly uneventful. In the early morning hours of October 20, 1916, The Colgate, under the command of Captain Walter J. Grashaw, departed Buffalo, New York with a load of coal bound for Fort William, Ontario. It was Captain Grashaw's first voyage in command of the James B. Colgate. He knew the ship well since he had spent the previous decade as her first mate. As the Colgate pulled away from the pier, heavy rain and winds were building, but Captain Grashaw was confident that his ship could survive the growing storm. The Colgate passed several other vessels as she slipped out of Buffalo Harbor. The crews had all decided it was best to wait out the storm. As the frigate reached the open lake, she struggled to make headway, as she was battered by the punishing winds and waves. Her tarps had all been shredded, but due to her whaleback design, it was impossible for her crew to secure the hatches. By the evening, it was clear that her hatches wouldn't hold. As water poured into her hold, her cargo of coal shifted, and she developed a severe list. Suddenly, one of her forward bulkheads collapsed, allowing a massive amount of water to spill into her forecastle. The Colgate began to settle by the head, and it was clear to her crew that she was at the mercy of the storm. At 10 p.m., Captain Grashaw gathered his crew as their ship disappeared beneath the surface, throwing the men into the churning seas. Captain Grashaw and his crew struggled to stay above the water, and when Grashaw was about to take his last breath, the Colgate's raft bumped into him. 2 men were already on board, and they lifted him into the boat. The 3 men spent several hours on the raft, struggling to keep from being thrown into the raging seas, before suddenly a massive wave flipped the raft over, and the men were thrown into the lake. The captain and 1 other crew member managed to climb back on, but the 3rd crew member was nowhere to be found. They spent another several hours on the raft before it flipped over once again. However, only Captain Grashaw was able to climb back on. He spent more than a day and a half on the raft, but on the morning of October 22nd, the car ferry Marquette Bessemer No. 2, the same one that replaced the original Marquette Bessemer 2 that was lost a few years earlier, came across Captain Grashaw in the raft. He was on the brink of death when he was brought aboard, but in the end, he survived. He was the only survivor from the James B. Colgate. While mostly forgotten today, the Black Friday storm was one of the deadliest storms to ever hit the Great Lakes, and the James B. Colgate was just one of 4 ships claimed by Lake Erie in the storm. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll never miss any new uploads from this channel. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.